I worry about young people. I worry about my children.
I think the lockdown has caused a lot more harm to our economy than the virus itself.
We're going to rebound, but we're not going to recover completely.
There is a possibility that there'll be a massive boon in consumer spending.
COVID-19 has created immense change all over the world. No one has been left untouched by its impact. What will be the short-term and long-term effects for the households, corporates, and governments who drive our economies? What will follow? Will we see a swift recovery, or will we face a wave of global bankruptcies? Is deflation or inflation on the horizon, or both? And finally, what does the data tell us about what our future world might look like? In this series, we ask experts in business and finance from across the globe about our prospects in a rapidly evolving environment in which multiple waves of infection could continually threaten a road to recovery. When the coronavirus struck, countries across the world took evasive action by imposing rules that restricted the ability for people to work, travel, or participate in recreational activities. Many households were confined to their homes, with excursions only allowed for essential items such as buying food and caring for the vulnerable. Millions of jobs disappeared overnight, and although governments have provided support, income security collapsed. In some regions, households had built up a savings buffer, whereas in others, consumers were living paycheck to paycheck and running high levels of debt even before the virus struck. Many households have seen their daily routines upended. But at the economic level, the impact of the crisis has created intense differences and an uneven financial burden.
It looks horrible. Look, I think the lockdown is having all kinds of unintended consequences. I think one of those is the destruction of a whole bunch of household balance sheets.
In the end, it's pretty clear there are categories of people whose jobs have been most affected, and there are categories of people who freelancers, for example, people who didn't get the benefit of short-term employment programs of the German type or Britain's furlough scheme. Those have been very badly affected. It's been incredibly unequal and uneven.
I know a guy who had 2 or 3 Michelin restaurants. He's had to close. He's selling his wine cellar. He hopes he comes back online someday, but if he does, he's going to be greatly crippled, going to have huge amounts of debt. He never had debt before, and his wine cellar's gone. I mean, this is having a huge effect at the small business, the big business, the country.
There's been immense inequality, diversity in the impact of the crisis. Lots of people are able to work from home. I'm able to work from home, more or less as if nothing had happened. Of course, the FT has been affected, and that's affected us, but not really dramatically. My life hasn't been fundamentally changed, either in terms of what I do or the economics of it, and that's true for a very large proportion of the population. And then there are the activities which have closed down.
The people who are wealthy, they're going to be fine. They're always going to be fine. They're going to, they're sitting on their triple tax exempt New York paper, whatever it is. They're going to be fine. They've locked in their wealth. It's the people in the middle. 38% had no cushion, no savings, no nothing.
One of the most senior figures in the recruitment industry fears there could be by the year end 5 million unemployed, which would be 5-fold increase over what it was. It was about 3.8%, I think, beginning of the year. So that will be unprecedented levels of unemployment compared to what we've been used to in recent years.
The system is designed to externalize all the costs onto the consumer. So I think the consumer is most at risk for insolvency, next being corporations, and finally governments.
I think investors and entrepreneurs who are critical to any revival and recovery will take some time to recover their animal spirits, because I think they have been very battered if they've spent 10 or 20 years building up a business and it's now slid into insolvency.
The government response has had far-reaching impacts on household consumption patterns. The intensity of the slowdown has been uneven, depending on the policy mix and the public response in each country.
Our propensity to overreact, which I would argue the lockdown, for example, is, and I think the lockdown has caused a lot more harm to our economy than the virus itself. So in other words, the black swan event was the lockdown, not the virus, means that we are less resilient than we might have been before, or we might have perceived we were. And that frightens me.
So if we take the northern part of Europe first, it's actually been fairly easy for corporates to send their employees home and then get a compensation from the government, while it's been more of a struggle in Southern Europe, which also means that the aid packages for employees in Southern Europe, they are less material, I would say, than the ones you've seen in Northern Europe.
This is Germany, Brazil, America, everywhere. This is going to have a devastating effect. The countries which didn't close are probably going to be better off than the ones that did. If you look at Belarus or Sweden or, 8 U.S. states never closed, I would suspect they're going to come out ahead. But what do I know? We'll know in 5 years.
Consumption has collapsed, even in countries that took more relaxed attitudes to shutting down their economies. As countries attempt to reopen, demand will re-emerge from the depths, but consumption patterns may have been permanently changed.
We will not go back, just as we were permanently poorer after the global financial crisis. If we're permanently poorer, then everybody's permanently poorer. And that means, their balance sheets will be worse in one way or another. At least their income will be lower.
But if we assume, which I don't think is unrealistic, that there's a recession now, effectively, and that we are all poorer, and that therefore, and there will be more unemployed, so there will be less discretionary spending, I think people will be even more careful with their money.
The consumer behavior patterns are going to change because there are going to be rule changes. Like today, they were talking about in New York, it's going to be one person per elevator. Seriously? I mean, how long would your commute be? And then do you have to reevaluate your commute? And then do you have to think about, well, if I don't work in an office building in downtown, I'm working from home. Do I need to go out to that overpriced lunch in New York restaurant? Or do I, make a sandwich at home? So I do think consumption patterns are going to change pretty dramatically.
Yeah, you could argue that. Because frankly speaking, a lot of the jobs that are lost now are in sectors where you don't have sort of a high skill level. So it will be very tricky to get all of these workers back on the labor market, I think, at least unless the whole service sector rebounds massively during the second half of the year.
And then you had this first wave of layoffs that was directly attributable to COVID, whether it was in leisure, hospitality, airlines, restaurants, products of the shutdown. Again, a lot of these people are getting more money than they made before. But then you have this second wave that's slowly building due to demand destruction attached to COVID, due to reopening being not as buoyant as what it had been hoped for, due to people like me who are more reticent to leave their house, even though we're told the economy's reopened. We're not going out into it and spending what we did before.
I think there's greater realization that again, this pandemic shock is rather uneven, right? It's the workers that don't have perhaps much savings, that earn below the median wage that's been hit hard. But perhaps for the capital owners, they haven't been hit as hard. But they were all forced to save up and not spend during the lockdowns, right? So I think we saw some personal saving rates really jumping quite dramatically.
There is going to be a resumption in consumption. You cannot go down to rock bottom and suggest to me that you're going to reopen an economy and mathematically not have a surge in consumption. We're going to go, for example, for the merry month of May, where we should have over 11 million annualized car sales in America. That's going to come off of 8.6. Great. It's not going to get anywhere back to the 17 million run rate that we saw before. And again, herein is going to lie your challenge. It's that we're going to rebound, but we're not going to recover completely.
The Refinitiv data suggests that we'll start seeing a recovery in the second half of the year. For the first quarter of 2020, the Refinitiv Retail Restaurant Earnings Index declined about 41%. And this is expected to decline even further for the second quarter of the year. And then we're expected to see an improvement in the third and fourth quarter, but earnings will still be negative for the most part. It's not until the first quarter of 2021 that we'll start seeing positive earnings, but still not at the levels that we've seen before the coronavirus.
consumption is down at least 30% in Southern Europe. But in Northern Europe, it's actually pretty close to being back at normalized levels already now. I think there is an important prerequisite for the whole consumption story rebounding, and that is that you contain the virus spread. The reason why consumption is back at normalized levels in Denmark is because we've managed to contain the virus.
Where debt levels were already a burden, households may now choose to delever and increase their savings rate. This could have far-reaching impacts on the long-term patterns of consumption.
History shows it's very difficult to run very fast when you have a lot of debt. If you don't have much debt, you can run it pretty fast. You can buy a new house here, a new car there, whatever you want. If you got a lot of debt, it's hard to run so fast.
But savings are a prerequisite to investment and resiliency in the economic order. And because we have debt-based money that's continuously producing cheap credit, it basically incentivizes everyone to take debt up to their eyeballs. And then when we have a shock like this, you really see things break down. So, in sum, all economic actors need to increase savings. U.S. personal savings had a parabolic spike. Pre-COVID, they were sub 10%. They've now spiked up to about 33%, which is a huge jump in very short order.
So yeah, Northeast Asia was ahead in terms of flattening the curve, and therefore, they started opening up much earlier. So, seeing what happened in terms of the consumer spending patterns and economy might offer some insights as sort of ASEAN countries are starting to unlock. I think, a priori, 3 months ago, most have been a bit more pessimistic and doubting any kind of V-shaped recovery.
People who do have clean balance sheets in 2 years are going to look back and say, we told you, you don't have to demand. Everybody's going to know. They're going to see Joe and Sally, who came out of this okay, and Bob and Mary, who didn't. And they're going to know why. No, but as I said, this is an age-old lesson. We forget it every once in a while.
The thing is, we're not seeing this wave when we should be seeing it because of the amount of stimulus that's been injected into the economy. We will see it. Banks will have their pain points, especially non-bank lenders will have their pain points. There will only be so much grace given for missed car payments, but it's going to be a slower push into delinquencies and defaults than what we've seen before that could push into 2021 because there's this false sense of the consumers doing better than they are because we're not seeing this immediate bloodletting that we saw in the aftermath of Lehman's fall, for example. So it's not that the distress is not there. It's that it's been put on hold. It's been put in a freezing pattern.
I do think the savings rate is going to increase a little bit, but only, again, at the top, because at the bottom, they don't have the flexibility. They don't have the income actually to save. Because this whole idea of UBI, I think, is going to go by the wayside.
Most of their income is going to go towards fixed obligations. More of their income will go towards fixed obligations like mortgages, car payments, and other debts, which is going to leave them very conservative in discretionary spending like retail, dining, and entertainment. The general theme I'm seeing in the world is just massive and unprecedented uncertainty where everything's being called into question. The institutions that shape our lives, the belief systems, everything's just being rocked kind of by our global interconnectedness.
What we'll see is that now, instead of involuntary deleveraging, you're going to have people who were told you better save for that rainy day, who now know what it feels like to not have that rainy day fund, to be paranoid about not being able to put food on the table.
There's been a whole bunch of increase in delinquencies on payments, whether it's home equity lines of credit or car payments. And we've all seen the numbers on rent and mortgage deferrals. So I think the personal balance sheet is in serious trouble unless you're really wealthy.
If you don't have a bounce back in an economy that is 2/3, 70% consumption, then you're going to have demand destruction in the end, and you're going to take the middle class down. And that's the real risk, because they're also one and the same with a lot of the small businesses that are going to fail as a result of COVID.
No doubt you are going to see wealth taxes, anything they can do to tax. And particularly when you think about that intergenerational transfer, that the old, we've done this, we've shut down economies and young people have stopped working so that we could protect those most vulnerable. There'll have to be some consideration. And I think that's why you end up with a wealth tax of some sort, because the majority of wealth is held by the baby boomers and above.
Much more than just a recession, I think we're going into a total breakdown of the established economic order in a 1929 style collapse. And, the only thing that's really going to get us through this is human ingenuity and inventiveness.
My hope is that at some point we come back to a level of consumption and real economy activity that far exceeds what we had prior to the virus. I mean, we've been on a positive trajectory for quite some time. I have faith in humanity that we will resume.
We're seeing consumers coming together to shop in their neighborhoods to support local businesses. And I think this is a very positive development because it's basically supporting the livelihoods of the members of their local communities and small business owners.
I do think some of the predictions about in the concern that people have had around kind of the economy, if you like, and will I have money in the future, and will people start putting money away? I think they've been overblown. There is a possibility that there'll be a massive boon in consumer spending because as people have kind of coped with all the risk, they want to somehow balance that off and just go a bit crazy with spending. And also that'll make them feel they've got a bit more control over their life.
The speed with which the virus hit the global economy and the response of policymakers has been incredible. The impact on households looks set to play out over months, if not years. Households may now voluntarily reduce debt levels, permanently impairing levels of consumption. Jobs could be hit yet again once the initial stimulus is rolled back. On the face of it, things look bleak. Nonetheless, we shouldn't underestimate our ability to bounce back in the face of adversity. The financial survival of ordinary people is going to be very reliant on the response from corporations and governments. But they are also under extreme pressure themselves. In the next episode, we look at what corporations might be able to do.